Ibrahim Traoré was examining the wreckage of the burned military aircraft. The American markings had been attempted to be erased but were still visible beneath the fuselage. "Mr. President, you need to see this," said Defense Minister Zongo, extending a metal box in his hand. "It's not the plane's black box. It's something else." When Traoré opened the box, the list of names on the screen shocked him. The list contained the leaders of 12 African countries. Next to his own name was a red mark and a date. July 16th, 2025, exactly 10 days from now. The northern region of Burkina Faso was mostly barren savanna. It was not a place where aircraft typically crashed. Commercial routes avoided the area, and military flights were rare since Traoré's government had expelled foreign bases 2 years earlier. When local villagers reported a downed aircraft in the early hours of July 6, 2025, Defense Minister Zongo immediately dispatched a military reconnaissance team. Their initial report was cryptic enough to warrant Traoré's personal attention. An unmarked military-type aircraft with no survivors, evidence of attempted destruction before impact, and unusual cargo. By the time Traoré's helicopter landed, near the crash site, the area had been secured with a 3-kilometer perimeter. "How long has the site been secured?" Traoré asked Zongo, who had arrived hours earlier. "Since 0500 hours, Mr. President. No one has approached except our personnel." They walked toward the wreckage, the smell of burned fuel hanging in the hot air. The aircraft was relatively small, a modified cargo plane designed for stealth operations. Its charred remains suggested an attempt to destroy it before or after crashing. "Any identification?" Traoré asked, studying the fuselage where someone had tried to sand away markings. "Nothing official. But the technology signatures are American, special operations modification patterns." "Survivors?" "None, sir. 4 bodies, all with military-grade physical conditioning, but no identifying documents or tags. Professional operatives." As they circled the wreckage, Traoré noticed Zongo's unusual tension. The defense minister was a veteran of multiple conflicts, not easily disturbed by crash sites or casualties. "What aren't you telling me, Minister?" Zongo hesitated, then gestured to a junior officer who approached carrying a metal case approximately the size of a laptop computer. It was matte black, with no markings, seemingly undamaged despite the crash. "It's not the plane's black box. It's something else," Zongo said, taking the case from the officer. It was in a special compartment with triple redundant shock absorption and fireproofing. "Whatever this is, it was designed to survive anything." Traoré took the case, feeling its unexpected weight. Along one edge was a sophisticated biometric scanner, currently inactive. No manufacturer logo, no serial number, no identifying marks of any kind. "Have you opened it?" "No, sir. The biometric security is beyond our current capabilities." As his helicopter lifted off 30 minutes later, Traoré gazed down at the crash site. Something about the timing felt deliberate. In just 10 days, he was scheduled to host a historic summit of West African leaders, a meeting aimed at establishing a new economic alliance independent of Western control. Was this crash a coincidence, or was it connected to the summit that Western powers had been actively trying to undermine? Back in Ouagadougou, in a secure room beneath the presidential palace, Traoré watched as Dr. Aminata Dio, head of Burkina Faso's newly established cybersecurity division, examined the mysterious box. "It's beyond anything I've seen, Mr. President," she said. "Titanium ceramic composite shell, quantum encryption protocols, biometric authentication that includes DNA verification. This isn't just secure, it's designed to destroy its contents, if improperly accessed." "Can you bypass it?" Traoré asked. "Not directly. But there's a hairline fracture in the casing that's disrupted the security circuit. If we can exploit that without triggering the failsafe, how long? Several hours, maybe longer." As Dr. Dio's team continued their work, Traoré convened an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors, Defense Minister Zongo, Foreign Minister Kabore, and Intelligence Director Konate. The aircraft was American, almost certainly CIA Special Activities Division. Konaté reported. We've intercepted increased encrypted communications between Langley and their regional stations since the crash. Have they made any official inquiries? Traoré asked. Foreign Minister Kabore shook his head. No, which itself is telling. Their silence confirms this was a covert operation they don't want to acknowledge. The timing concerns me, said Traoré. 10 days before the West African Economic Independence Summit. The summit represented years of careful diplomacy. 12 West African nations were prepared to announce a new economic framework that would significantly reduce Western influence, shifting commodity pricing power, establishing a gold-backed regional currency, and creating more favorable terms for partnerships with non-Western countries. We should postpone the summit, suggested Kabore. That may be exactly what they want, countered Konaté, creating disruption, sowing uncertainty. Before Traoré could respond, his secure phone vibrated. It was Dr. Dio. Mr. President, we've done it. The box is open. 20 minutes later, Traoré stood in the secure lab, staring at the contents of the mysterious case. Inside was a sophisticated tablet-like device displaying information from a database labeled Operation Black Autumn. The screen showed a list of names, the leaders of all 12 nations participating in the upcoming summit. Next to each name were dates, detailed security assessments, psychological profiles, and specific intervention protocols. Next to Traoré's name was a red mark and a date, July 16, 2025, the day of the summit. This is, Traoré began, unable to find adequate words. An assassination and coup coordination plan, completed Intelligence Director Konaté, her voice tight with controlled anger. Targeting every independent-minded leader in West Africa simultaneously. Operation Black Autumn was a comprehensive plan to reset West African leadership in a single coordinated action. Military assets were already positioned. Local collaborators had been recruited. Media narratives were prepared to explain the sudden popular uprisings that would remove these leaders. The level of detail was staggering. The plan included Traoré's daily routines, the names of his security personnel, architectural layouts of the buildings where he worked and lived, even his medical information. How did they get this intelligence? He asked. Dr. Dio looked up grimly. Sir, this appears to be a joint operation, not just American. The British, French, Canadians. It's a coordinated Western intelligence initiative. This wasn't just another example of Western interference in African politics. It was a comprehensive plan to simultaneously decapitate a dozen governments that were challenging the post-colonial economic order. The summit, Traoré said quietly. It frightened them more than we realized. Mr. President, we need to alert the other leaders immediately, said Defense Minister Zongo. And we need to prepare for possible accelerated action. Now that they've lost this intelligence package, they may move their timetable forward. Traoré nodded. Secure this facility. No communications in or out, except through encrypted channels that we personally approve. Dr. Dio, I want every bit of data extracted and backed up securely. He turned to his advisors. We have 10 days, maybe less, to turn this attack into a historic opportunity for African sovereignty. The corrected version continues from here with the same grammar-focused approach. Traoré had implemented this overt act of aggression. It changed everything. It was no longer possible for Western powers to maintain the fiction that their operations were covert or limited to intelligence gathering. They had launched a military strike against a sovereign nation's capital city. Traoré, monitoring the situation from the actual summit location, made the final decision. Release the Black Autumn files. All channels, worldwide distribution, right now. At precisely noon on July 14th, as the 7 arrived, leaders gathered in a secure underground facility on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The world's media erupted with an unprecedented story. Thousands of journalists simultaneously received detailed documentation of Operation Black Autumn, the Western plan to violently reset West African leadership. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. operational plans, surveillance reports, psychological profiles, lists of local collaborators, media manipulation strategies, and the timeline for coordinated interventions against democratically elected leaders. Most critically, the files revealed the true motivation behind Operation Black Autumn, preventing the West African Economic Independence Summit from establishing a new framework that would reduce Western control over the region's resources and finances. The files were released alongside video statements from the 7 leaders already in Ouagadougou, each addressing their nations and the world from the secure summit location. Today, we have evidence of what African nations have long suspected, Traoré said in his statement. Western powers speak of democracy, sovereignty, and human rights while actively planning the violent overthrow of elected African governments whose only crime is seeking economic independence. President Adama of Senegal was even more direct. This is the modern face of colonialism. When African nations assert control over their own resources and futures, Western powers respond with assassination and coup plots. The global reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside Western embassies across Africa. International human rights organizations demanded investigations. Non-Western powers like China, Russia, and India issued statements condemning the exposed operation. Even within Western nations, opposition parties and civil society groups expressed outrage at their government's duplicity. As the revelations dominated global headlines, the remaining 5 leaders managed to reach Ouagadougou despite intensifying efforts to intercept them. By evening, all 12 were present, creating a powerful symbolic image of unity and defiance when they appeared together in a live broadcast. Western governments, caught completely off guard by the accelerated timeline and public exposure, issued confused and contradictory responses. Initial denials gave way to claims of misinterpreted intelligence, and eventually to carefully worded statements about legitimate security concerns that convinced few observers. The drone strike against Ouagadougou, initially denied, became impossible to disavow when satellite imagery emerged, showing the launch from a U.S. facility in Niger. This physical attack on a sovereign capital, combined with the exposed Black Autumn files, created a diplomatic catastrophe for Western governments. Within the secure summit facility, the 12 leaders worked through the night, finalizing the economics framework they had originally planned to announce 2 days later. But now their agreement would come with additional elements addressing security cooperation and mutual defense against external interference. By morning, with Western military forces still positioning, but now constrained by global exposure and diplomatic backlash, the summit participants made their final move. In a coordinated announcement, they revealed the West African Sovereignty Alliance, a comprehensive agreement covering economic cooperation, security collaboration, and diplomatic unity. The alliance's first action was to demand the immediate withdrawal of all unauthorized Western military personnel from the region, with a deadline of 72 hours. The second was to announce the creation of a new regional currency backed by gold reserves, breaking the French-controlled CFA franc system that had maintained economic control over former French colonies for decades. The third action was perhaps the most consequential, a formal invitation to non-Western powers, including China, Russia, India, and Brazil, to establish new economic and security partnerships based on mutual respect and non-interference. Western capitals, reeling from the public relations disaster and facing internal political pressure, had few options. Military intervention, which might have been presented as counter-terrorism before the Black Autumn exposure, was now politically impossible. Economic sanctions would only accelerate the region's pivot away from Western financial systems. By the end of July 14th, just 8 days after the discovery of the mysterious black box, the geopolitical landscape of West Africa had been transformed. Operation Black Autumn, designed to maintain Western control through coordinated regime change, had instead catalyzed the very independence it sought to prevent. The 3 months following what became known as the Black Box Revolution saw dramatic Changes across West Africa. The West African Sovereignty Alliance, initially comprising the 12 summit nations, expanded to include 3 more countries. The new regional currency, the Sankara, named after Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Thomas Sankara, launched successfully, its gold backing providing immediate credibility in international markets. Western military forces, facing the unified demand for withdrawal and unprecedented global scrutiny, largely complied with the 72-hour deadline. Economic relations were more complex to disentangle, but the alliance moved methodically, establishing new trade relationships with non-Western partners, renegotiating resource extraction contracts, and creating regional financial institutions, independent of Western control. For Ibrahim Traoré personally, the Black Box Revolution elevated his status from national leader to regional statesman. His decisive handling of the crisis, willingness to take calculated risks, and ability to unite diverse leaders around a common cause established him as the alliance's most prominent voice. 6 months after the revolution, Traoré invited the other 11 original leaders to a private commemoration in Ouagadougou. They gathered in the same secure facility where they had made history, now permanently established as the Alliance Coordination Center. The mysterious black box that had started everything sat in a glass case at the center of the room, a reminder of how chance, preparation, and courage had converged to change history. "We should never forget how close we came to disaster," Traoré told his colleagues as they studied the device. "If that aircraft hadn't crashed, if our teams hadn't secured the crash site quickly, if Dr. Dio hadn't found a way to access the files, without triggering the security measures, each of us might be dead or in exile now, and our countries returned to effective colonial status." President Obi of Nigeria placed a hand on Traoré's shoulder. "It wasn't just luck, Ibrahim. It was also readiness. Your government had the capability to recognize the opportunity and the courage to act decisively." As the commemoration concluded, they discussed the challenges ahead. Western powers hadn't abandoned their goals, only their methods. The struggle for true independence would continue for years, perhaps generations. But something fundamental had changed. West African nations were no longer isolated, playing defense against more powerful forces. They were united, proactive, and increasingly setting the terms of their international relationships. That evening, after the other leaders had departed, Traoré returned alone to his office in the presidential palace. On his desk was a framed photograph of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, who had been assassinated in 1987 during a coup supported by Western powers. Next to the photograph was a small fragment of metal, a piece of the crashed aircraft that had delivered the black box into their hands. His secure phone rang, interrupting his reflection. It was Dr. Dio, who had continued analyzing the Black Autumn files for additional intelligence. "Mr. President," she said, her voice tense with excitement, "we found something else in the files, something bigger than the assassination plans." "What is it?" Traoré asked. "Financial algorithms. The complete code base for the systems that Western banks use to manipulate currency values, commodity prices, and credit ratings. With this, we could potentially neutralize their ability to use financial markets as weapons against African economies." Traoré felt the weight of this new discovery. The black box revolution had changed the political landscape. This new information could transform the economic battlefield as well. "Secure the data," he instructed, "and convene a meeting of the Alliance Financial Committee. This may be the next chapter in our independent struggle." As he ended the call, Traoré looked again at Sankara's photograph. "The work continues," he said quietly to the image of his predecessor. "But now, finally, we're writing our own story." The black box, discovered by chance in a crashed aircraft, had revealed not just Western plans for regime change, but also the depth of their fear about African independence. That fear confirmed what Traoré and other progressive African leaders had long believed. True sovereignty was possible. The path would be difficult, the resistance fierce, but the direction was now clear. The next chapter of African history would be written by Africans themselves.